New video, new region, Central Africa. But before we return to the shores of Africa, we have one last stop. The British islands of St. Helena, Ascension, and Tristan da Cunha. These islands are located in the South Atlantic, along the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. This is a massive crack in the sea floor where it is literally ripping apart, all the way from the Arctic Ocean to the very South Atlantic. It's an oceanic counterpart to the East Africa Rift. This rift has allowed magma hotspots to ooze out like a giant geological scab, creating the islands of St. Helena and Ascension and the archipelago of Tristan da Cunha. The volcanoes on the first two are long extinct, but Tristan's is still active. This and the presence of Inaccessible and Nightingale Islands close by suggest a particularly large hotspot underneath. Gough Island is politically but not geographically part of the archipelago. Despite being in the tropics, the Benguela Current creates dry but mild desert conditions on Ascension and St. Helena, though the highlands are somewhat wetter. St. Helena has groundwater aquifers. Ascension does not. Tristan da Cunha, by contrast, is located further south in the temperate latitudes. Rain is abundant and temperatures cool due to the westerlies. Shrublands cover all three islands. Ascension is too dry, but woodlands once covered much of St. Helena. The winds keep trees on Tristan stunted. All three harbor endemic species of plants and animals, and Tristan da Cunha provides breeding grounds for seabirds and seals. Like many islands in the Atlantic and Indian Oceans, the Portuguese were first to discover them. Our friend João da Nova, on his way to India, discovered Ascension Island in 1501 on Ascension Day, and on his way back, named St. Helena after her feast day, although this is disputed. Either way, 1506, Tristan da Cunha discovers and names the island that bears his name. Dry Ascension Island offered little for the Portuguese, but St. Helena becomes a preferred stopover during voyages. They don't settle it, but they do harvest wood, water, and meat before continuing on their way. They also let loose goats on the island for future use, which disrupts the native island ecology. Well, where 16th century Portuguese went, Dutch were never far behind. Dutch and English privateers used St. Helena as a raiding base, and soon the Portuguese withdraw to ports on the African mainland. The Dutch then enjoyed their new island, formally claiming it in 1633. Again, no settlement occurs, and they abandoned it in 1651 in favor of a new town on the Cape of Good Hope. The English, denied any other options, create the first settlement on St. Helena, St. John. This was actually the doing of the East India Company for their voyages east. 1660, with the restoration of the monarchy, St. John was renamed Jamestown in honor of the Duke of York, future King James II. St. Helena's main purpose was to provide provisions for voyages to and from India, and settlers and slaves were brought over to grow crops and raise livestock for the company. Thus, the island's people began as it remains much now, a classic imperial mix of Europeans, Africans, and Asians. 1672, with buyer's remorse for Cape Town, the Dutch tried to take back the island, only to be thrown back the next year. St. Helena passed without much hullabaloo, even as the Act of Union merged the kingdoms of England and Scotland into Great Britain in 1707. Meanwhile, Tristan da Cunha became a popular destination for whalers and sealers from America, and one Jonathan Lambert claimed the islands as Lord and Prince of the Islands of Refreshment. He drowned the next year, but American ships used it as a base in the War of 1812. St. Helena is most famous for hosting Napoleon Bonaparte following his failed reunion tour and defeat at Waterloo in 1815, far away from anywhere he could harm Europe again. The British were so serious about this, they garrisoned a couple thousand soldiers on the island, and for good measure, annexed Ascension just in case French patriots tried to smuggle their erstwhile emperor back home. Ascension Island became a naval base under direct rule of the British Admiralty, named the HMS Ascension as though it were a ship. Its capital was Georgetown, after then-King George III. War with the United States ended in 1814, but Britain still annexed Tristan da Cunha in 1816 as part of the Cape Colony. The outlying islands were all named for British officers who discovered them. Its one town was just named The Settlement. Slavery was ended on St. Helena as early as 1827, ahead of the rest of the empire. The 1833 Government of India Act did a number of things related to the East India Company, including transferring ownership of St. Helena to the British government as a crown colony, effective 1836. The islands continued their respective roles, but this diminished in the latter half of the 19th century, first with the American Civil War stopping marine mammal traffic to Tristan da Cunha, and then the opening of the Suez Canal, drastically shortening the voyage to India. But ship traffic didn't stop entirely, and the British installed coaling stations for new steamships. Duke Alfred of Edinburgh visited Tristan da Cunha in 1867, prompting the people to rename the settlement to Edinburgh of the Seven Seas. Beginning in 1899, during the Second Boer War in South Africa, work was begun on the All Red Line, laying undersea telegraph cable from London to Cape Town, through St. Helena and Ascension. This wonder of modern technology was finished in 1902, allowing instantaneous communication half a world away. Also, some 6,000 Boer prisoners of war were transferred to St. Helena camps. They were returned afterwards, though. Tristan, however, remained isolated. So isolated, in fact, that no ships arrived between 1909 and 1919. Presumably, they didn't hear about World War I until it was already over. In 1922, Ascension was given over to the colony of St. Helena, becoming St. Helena and Dependencies. Tristan da Cunha followed in 1938, consolidating Britain's holdings in the South Atlantic. In 1961, Queen Mary's Peak erupted, prompting Britain to evacuate Tristan da Cunha's people until 1963, when they returned, a courtesy not given to the Chagosians. Decolonization was the course for Europe's old empires during the 50s, 60s, and 70s, probably anticipating it would withdraw from all its colonies, and interested in restricting immigration to the home isles. Britain passed the 1981 British Nationality Act, revoking citizenship from the islanders. In 1983, the colony was rebranded as a dependent territory. However, the islands were firmly British, small, and with few people. The islanders neither wanted to, nor really could, become independent or part of some other country. The loss of Hong Kong in 1997 meant the loss of the last British colony with a sizable population. So, in 2002, her remaining dependent territories were redesignated as overseas territories, their citizenship restored. 2009, St. Helena and Dependencies was renamed St. Helena, Ascension, and Tristan da Cunha, giving all three equal dignity and their own local governments. Today, the islands mainly thrive off of tourism, like for Napoleon's exile home or the wildlife of Tristan da Cunha. Recent airfields make travel to St. Helena and Ascension easier, though not to Tristan. The islanders might prefer it that way. Okay, we've finished up those islands. Now we can go back to Africa, and we're going to go to Angola. See you next time.